the dominant religious institutions in American society that have had a tremendous effect on all different ways that people believe and think simply don't have the kind of influence they once had, because there's a group of people that are not connected to those organizations. Some of those people are hostile to them, but many of them are not hostile. In fact, they actually have positive views of religious organizations, but it's just not for them, or at least not for them at this moment. And part of the factor here is generational change, because younger people, people under 30, for instance, are much more likely to be unaffiliated than their parents and their grandparents. So whatever this change means today, it's going to continue to have meaning as those people grow up and as we move forward. So this does mark an important change, because the United States has, for a long time, been the most religious of the advanced industrial societies, and it still is, but we see a trend where the United States is looking more like other advanced industrial societies, at least in this respect, such as those societies in Europe. So this does mark an important change in the distinctiveness of American society. Many of the unaffiliated still believe in God. Many of them have spiritual values. Many of them are actually involved in a religious or spiritual quest of a personal nature rather than a group nature. So we have to be cautious about assuming that religion is on the way out. It's just that one kind or one aspect of religion seems to be declining. We have a larger number of people that don't participate in religious communities like their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. Religious affiliation has often been closely associated with the major party coalitions, with the Democrats and the Republicans each drawing on different religious communities, and sometimes fighting over religious communities that are pretty evenly divided between the two parties. Well, as people are less involved in organized religion, then those relationships change. And the unaffiliated population, while hardly monolithic, does have a definite partisan tendency, which is the unaffiliated tend to vote more Democratic than the affiliated or than the population as a whole. And in a very close election, they can turn out to be very critical. It's a large group now, and it's a group with a definite partisan bias. Some of that has to do with the politics of the moment and perhaps preferring President Obama over Governor Romney. But some of it has to do with the longer-term trend that the values of the unaffiliated put them in closer contact with the Democratic Party than with the Republican Party. And of course, during that same time period, the Republicans acquired a traditionally religious constituency, and some of the tensions between the parties these days have to do with that tension between the unaffiliated and the most traditionally religious people in the United States. What really counts is how people vote. And we do know from the past that the unaffiliated tend to vote less often than people who are religiously affiliated. Now, that's for a lot of reasons. One reason is because they tend to be younger, and younger people don't vote at the same numbers as older people. Part of it is because the unaffiliated aren't involved in religious organizations or other kinds of community organizations that encourage people to turn out and vote. So if you look on election day, say in an exit poll, the unaffiliated may not be the largest group. They may not be a full 25 or 24% of the vote. They may be somewhat less because of that lower turnout, but they will certainly be among the largest groups of voters that support Democratic candidates. I think these numbers reveal why the Democrats have had to struggle with the notion that they're unfriendly to religion, whether they are or not, because of two reasons. First of all, there are a lot of unaffiliated people in among their ranks, and like any political party, they pay attention to the people who vote for them. But also there are often tensions between the unaffiliated in the Democratic Party and Democrats who are involved in organized religion over a whole variety of issues, but particularly over cultural issues, things like abortion and same-sex marriage. A lot of tension there. And when Democrats try to assemble a platform, try to nominate a candidate, oftentimes those tensions come out. And it looks like here's a party that's fighting over some of these basic issues. Now, to be fair, the Republicans have some religious tensions in their coalition as well, and the two large parties often have these kinds of problems. But with the growing number of unaffiliated voters and their increasing connection to the Democratic Party, then those tensions between them and affiliated Democrats have become much more prominent. And I think that's part of what drives the image that, as some analysts have put it, maybe the Democratic Party has a God problem of one kind or another. Democratic Party leaders do face some interesting challenges. How do they, for instance, get the black Protestant churches to mobilize voters and to be very enthusiastic about their platform and their candidate without turning off unaffiliated voters? And how do they appeal to those people and get them involved and excited about the candidate without alienating some of the religious communities that support the Democratic Party? It's a really interesting problem, and there's no one simple solution to that problem. But historically, party leaders have done a couple of things. One is they've tried to seek for the common values. What are the things that might unite, for instance, black Protestants with unaffiliated voters or atheists, for instance? Or what are the kinds of things that can bring Catholics and Protestants together? So there's a sense of looking for those common values. And our survey reveals that there actually are some common values that can bring these folks together. But it may be that overt appeals to religion is not one of them. And both parties have often had that problem, because when you start making an appeal to religion, it oftentimes becomes appeal to a specific religion, and then other people feel left out. They don't always feel alienated, but they could feel alienated. So the kinds of appeals that the party puts together may have to change somewhat, because the overt appeals to religiosity may not be as effective as they were in the past. There is a sense in the secular community that religion shouldn't play the kind of prominent role in campaigns. Now, many of those same people view religious communities and institutions as doing lots of good things in society, right? Helping the poor, helping people pursue justice, think about ethics and morals, but they just don't think that that should be front and center in election campaigns. Now, of course, many traditionally religious people, including many Democrats, think that's fine, right? They think that the involvement of religious communities in politics in an overt way is a good thing, because it brings very important values to bear on public problems. So part of the disagreement here is how public a role should religion play in politics. Many people say that organized religion has too many rules, and that's one of the things that makes them not want to be involved. In other cases, they think that religious leaders are too interested in power and money and not interested enough in the well-being of their followers. And that's another thing that turns people off. But a large group of the unaffiliated also think that religion functions effectively in society at the social level, even if it doesn't work for them personally at this point in time. And that's interesting, because there is a recognition that whatever the political role of religion may be, that the social role is quite positive. Religion has played an important role in the 2012 campaign. It was especially evident during the primaries, when the Republicans were battling each over who would win the nomination. And once that was settled, the attention to religion declined a little bit, but it's still going on and is still very important. And one of the reasons is that the election is likely to be very close. Just about every analyst thinks that this election is likely to be settled by the last handful of votes in some of the key states. And so both political parties are reaching out as effectively as they can to their religious constituencies and trying to persuade the undecided voters in religious groups to vote for them. A lot of that effort, though, is not on television. It's going on behind the scenes, because appealing to a particular group always has the capacity of alienating another group. This is true for Democrats as well as Republicans, so they're trying to assemble these coalitions a little bit, I wouldn't say completely below radar, but certainly off television. There's another reason, though. The election seems to be primarily about the economy. Unemployment rate is being debated, government debt, government spending, the different philosophies of the parties. And polls show us that that's where voters are focused right now. But those same polls show that the electorate is fairly evenly divided on those questions. In recent polls, President Obama's had a little bit of an advantage, but it's Governor Romney in other polls has been dead even with the president when it comes to the economic issues. And so there's some strong incentives for the parties to reach out for secondary issues like women's rights, religious liberty, the environment, foreign policy. Because if voters are evenly divided on their most salient issue, the economy, they're going to make their decision perhaps on some of these secondary issues that they don't regard as the most important, but they may not be able to choose between Governor Romney and President Obama on something like unemployment. So some of these other issues may matter. And I think as we get closer to the election, we'll see some of those issues, some of them directly connected with faith, like some of the social issues, some of them maybe a little more removed, like foreign policy. I think we'll start to see those coming out because there's some votes to be gained by emphasizing those things. Here in the early going, we haven't had a lot of discussion of religion by the candidates, but that's not untypical in close elections. Candidates do often benefit from their talking about their personal faith, but once that becomes politicized, it can create some real problems for them. So they tend to stick to other sets of issues. And of course, both President Obama and Governor Romney have some real strengths when it comes to religion. They're both very religiously committed individuals within their own religious traditions. But there's also some liabilities. Polls show us that there are some Americans, including a number of Republican voters, that are still skeptical of voting for a Mormon for president. On the other hand, there's a small number of Americans who still believe that President Obama is not a Christian, but is actually a Muslim. And some of those people might otherwise want to vote Democratic on economic grounds. So there's some real positives to these candidates' faith, but there's also a potential downside. And so that's why we don't see the candidates themselves talking a lot about it, but their surrogates and their campaigns are reaching out to religious and non-religious voters alike, trying to bring them into their camp. I think that Governor Romney does face a challenge with getting high level of turnout and enthusiastic support from the white evangelical community, which has been a mainstay of Republican presidential vote for a number of years now. And that's because there are this lingering skepticism. There are, of course, theological differences between evangelicals and Mormons that are longstanding. And a number of evangelical leaders who support Governor Romney have been working very hard to try to convince the rank and file that it's really okay that they're not choosing a theologian-in-chief, they're choosing a commander-in-chief, and that's some of the language that they've used. And my sense is that Governor Romney and these evangelical leaders have made some progress since the end of the Republican primaries, but I also sense that they have a little bit farther to go, that there's still some lingering concern. Of course, many of the individuals who have these concerns about voting for a Mormon candidate also have some disagreements with President Obama. So it's not as if there isn't something that the Republicans can work with in that regard. But there are other religious groups that are in some ways up for grabs. For the first time in American history, we have a Roman Catholic on both parties' tickets. Joe Biden, Vice President Joe Biden for the Democrats, and the vice presidential nominee, Congressman Paul Ryan, for the Republicans. And that does reveal the divisions within the Roman Catholic community. I mean, there are, if you will, Biden Catholics and Ryan Catholics, and both campaigns are struggling very hard to get those groups mobilized. But then there are a lot of Catholics that are in the middle, who might agree with the Republicans on one issue and with the Democrats on another. So quite an effort to get the middle-of-the-road Catholics to swing one way or another. And those middle-of-the-road Catholics are very important in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania and Missouri and Florida, which are the key battleground states. So, the argument isn't just among evangelicals. There's a big argument going on among Roman Catholics as well, and each side understands that every vote will count. And so they're out talking to these religious communities, often through leaders. There are prominent Catholic leaders who come out on behalf of President Obama and on Governor Romney to talk to their co-religionists. Many conservative Christians have long believed in what's called a providential origins of the United States, that God has played a very special role in creating the United States and its institutions, and that, furthermore, the United States has a very special role to play in the world because of that kind of origins. And I've seen a lot of references to that here in this campaign, more than usual. And I think part of it is because the world around us is very unsettled at the moment. We only have to think about a lot of the turmoil in the Middle East of just the last few days. There is a sense among many people, but especially among conservative Christians, that we live in a time of instability where it's important to reaffirm Americans' values, and for them, those values are rooted in their religion. And I think part of what causes that tinge is that there are religious elements to the turmoil in the world. A lot of the turmoil occurs among Islamic groups, really on both sides of the turmoil. And then, of course, there's the persistent question of the state of Israel and what American policy would be towards it. So I do think that there is, at least among those conservative Christian communities, a sense that there is a religious dimension to the role of the United States in the world. And not everybody in the United States would agree with that perspective, but for those groups, that's important. And so I think that's why we're hearing it in the context of the campaign.